seat. And if you're kids, 5th grade and under, you guys can be dismissed for your time together downstairs. So as they're kind of heading out, if you've got a Bible with you or an app or something you can turn on, we're going to be in Daniel chapter 6 today. We've been teaching through the book of Daniel. And if you are like brand new to church, brand new to the Bible, I want to say welcome. All right? We're all students together. In fact, the word primarily used for those people that follow Jesus is disciple, which means student. So we're all disciples. I'm a pastor, but I'm also a student of Jesus. So we're all kind of in the same spot together. But if you're brand new to the Bible, I just want to introduce the Bible really quick to you before we kind of dive in together. So the Bible's kind of broke up into two parts. There's an Old Testament and a New Testament. The Old Testament tells the story of how God created the world, and he created a good world that was perfect. He actually had people in it, if you can believe that. And the people were given specific tasks to cultivate and to create and to basically take what God had made and like make it even better. And so he invited them into this partnership, and they said, no thanks. We'll decide what we want to do with our time and our lives. And they rebelled against God. And we basically, the aftermath of that is what we're all living in. The Bible calls that sin. And so there's this kind of, whenever we talk about a God in heaven that has a specific plan, a purpose for our lives, on the one hand, there's something comforting about it. But there's also like, well, but I want to do what I want to do kind of feeling, okay? So I want you to know that's just the human struggle. This is it. This is how it goes. But what we're all trying to do is figure out how to lean more into the story of the scriptures. And so the story kind of continues. God chooses this special family. They become a nation, actually, because that's kind of how things start. Usually it's a family, and things kind of grow from there. And so this nation, God says, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed through this specific nation. Except they aren't, at least not in the way you expect. And then God says, well, there's going to be a king that's going to come, and that king's going to provide wisdom, and everybody's going to want to come and learn from that king. And so they think like, oh, we've got this king, but then it turns out that guy's no good either. And then the kingdom gets like separated, and all kinds of crazy stuff happens. And essentially, God's people, his chosen nation, they actually get conquered by another nation. Actually, two different nations. And then they get carried off into exile. So you just imagine, you're like, let's just say the Japanese invaded the United States. Didn't happen, right? It's just and they carried a bunch of us off to Japan. That's the situation that Daniel is. He's carried off. He's got this new language. They actually give him a different name because they can't pronounce his name, maybe, or they just decide like we're going to change your name to mean something that's cooler for us. And so he is basically a slave. He's been castrated by this group of people, and he's living in this situation. And he's actually been in this situation for 70 years, which is where we're going to pick it up today. And so the Bible then, Daniel, actually, we're going to end today talking about the biographical portions of Daniel. So actually in the Hebrew Bible, Daniel is listed in the histories because it does have some history in it. But then in the Christian Bible, it's usually listed with the prophets, right? And so if you've read Daniel before, you know that what's coming next is all the weird stuff. It's just going to be so fun. So if you guys would be willing to pray for me as I try to like work through some of those things and try to help mine the scriptures for what's really helpful for us to think through. I do think that it takes the whole Bible to make a whole Christian, and so I want to be faithful to try to teach through these sections. But I do want to let you know, if you're like a Bible nerd person or you've been in the church for a while, the next sections of Daniel are going to be some of the weirder and more difficult interpretive passages in the scriptures. And so if you want to dive into all that, I'm happy to have some of those discussions with you. But I do want to let you know, as far as our church goes, those passages in Daniel are not meant to divide the church over different views on these things, okay? But they are meant to provide hope to us. And so that's what we're going to focus on, is the hope that we have through those prophecies and how God's kind of at work. We're going to kind of look at some of that today. But essentially, back to the story of the Bible. You guys still with me? You okay? Yeah, we kind of took a little detour there. But essentially, Daniel promises, some of the things that Daniel promises is that even though it seems like everything has totally blown up, which it has, okay? Like the temple is destroyed, there's no more nation of Israel, there's nothing. It still says God's at work behind all of that. And he's going to send somebody who is actually going to fulfill all of those things that he did promise to us. We just have to wait and see how it's all going to work out. And so as Christians, we actually believe that Jesus is the answer to all of those things that we're going to look at in Daniel as we look forward into the future a little bit in Daniel. And then Jesus comes. He lives a perfect, sinless human existence. He actually is God. He was fully God and fully human. He died then on a cross, like kind of unexpectedly, even for his own disciples. And he was sort of murdered by the state of Rome, and you may have heard that story before, but then he didn't stay dead, which is kind of a pretty wild thing. 3 days later, he resurrected, and then he actually spent 40 days interacting with people in this resurrected form before he ascended into heaven, and then he poured out the Holy Spirit on his followers, and they birthed this movement called the church, which is now all over the globe. And so when we read the scriptures, we're invited into this whole story. And part of how we're supposed to see ourselves in this story, in the book of Daniel, is that the same kind of spirits that are perpetrated all throughout the world over and over again, as you read the Bible, one of the things you realize, and I just had a friend that just finished the Bible for the first time, and he said, one of the things I realized is that people haven't changed. Right? It's a 6,000-year-old document that shows the same kind of stuff that's happening all over and over and over again, right? It's I think there's a great quote from a historian that says the only thing that we've learned from history is that we've learned nothing from history, right? That's kind of what the Bible shows, that you can't solve a sin problem with education and new systems, but what we actually need is somebody outside of our situation to help us fix what's broken. And we believe that that's Jesus. So, as we're looking at the book of Daniel, we're thinking about what does it mean for us as followers of Jesus to live in exile. That's kind of what this is. Like, so imagine we have a home country. That home country is Jesus' kingdom. And then we're kind of like displaced. We have different languages. We have different ways of thinking about things. And so how do we thrive in exile or thrive in Babylon when it feels like everything is kind of contradictory to the ways that we think about things as Jesus followers? And so that's what we've been kind of thinking about. Today we're going to look at probably one of the most famous passages of Scripture from the Bible. And if you accidentally got drugged to church at any time, you may have heard this story before. It's about Daniel and the lion's den. And maybe you saw a felt chart once and had these. Some of you old Sunday school teachers are like, man, those are the best days. So we're going to read the chapter together. It's kind of long, but just want to read it together, and we'll dig in as we think about this. So, just a little background. We left Daniel. Daniel is now an old man. It's important to remember because some of those felt charts didn't depict it that way, right? So Daniel's about 85-ish years old, maybe closer to 90. I don't think we have anybody in the room that's there. But I just want to encourage you guys, wherever you are in your retirement plan, God's not finished with you, so better just something to be aware of. So Daniel is an old man. There's just been a military coup, okay? We all know this is a time of political unrest. That's not a very great time to be alive, usually. And normally what happens in situations when there's a military coup is they just kill everybody that was in charge. But somehow Daniel survives the initial, cut, and he gets put in charge of some things. So Darius decided to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, station them throughout the realm, and put over them 3 administrators, including Daniel. So Daniel's above the satraps. These satraps would be accountable to them so that the king would not be defrauded. And Daniel distinguished himself above the administrators and the satraps because he had an extraordinary spirit. So the king planned to set him over the whole realm. So Daniel was already a manager of managers, and he's about to be promoted to an executive level position. And people are not happy about that. You know? The new generation is like, let's get these old timers out of the way here. Right? So the administrators and the satraps, therefore, they kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom. But they could find no charge of corruption because nothing was found in it. And then these men said, we're never going to find anything on this guy. Hear the frustration? They just wanted some dirt to bring up to the king so that Daniel wouldn't get, and they just couldn't get any. This guy's clean as a whistle. 85 years old, and he's got nothing in his past. He could be a great politician. We're never going to find anything unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God. In other words, we got to make a problem because there's not one. So the administrators, the satraps, they went before the king and they said to him, "May King Darius live forever." All the administrators of the kingdom, all of them, somehow, they got everybody on the same page, have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days, anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. Now, what we think happened is actually there was the Medes and Persians kind of took over together, and then the Persians kind of had their own religion, but it was like a mess at this point. And so what we think probably they were doing was like, hey, our religion is a mess, so why don't we just kind of reset everything, have everybody pray to you for 30 days, kind of get everything back on track, right? The king was like, yeah, sounds like a good idea. Let's do it. Therefore, your majesty, establish the edict and sign the document. As the law of the Medes of the Persians, it is revocable and cannot be changed. Important information here. So King Darius signed the document. No problem, guys. Sounds good. 30 days, let's do it. Let's give it a shot. So when Daniel learned the document and signed, he went into his house. The windows in its upper room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed and gave thanks to God, just as he had done before. These men went as a group, and they found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. I don't know how they did that. Just had some spies set up to hear what he was saying. So they approached the king, and they asked about the edict. Hey, king, didn't you sign this edict for 30 days? Any man who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. The king answered, as the law of the Medes and the Persians, the order stands, and it is irrevocable. They replied to the king, Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, O king, and the edict that you signed, and he prays 3 times a day. And as soon as the king heard this, he was very displeased. He set his mind on rescuing Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. Then these men went to the king and they said, King, you know, it is the law of the Medes and the Persians that no edict or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. In other words, you, O king, are trapped by your own words. So the king gave an order. They brought Daniel. They threw him into the lion's den. And the king said, Daniel, to Daniel, your God who you continually serve rescue you. So stone was brought. They placed it over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring so that nobody would mess with it. So nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. And then the king went to his palace, and the king spent the night fasting. Now, I don't know about you, I usually spend the night fasting too. I'm asleep. But I think he was awake. So no diversions were brought to him. Apparently that's also a thing. Kings get like diversions brought to them. Anyways, he could not sleep. That's the key. He couldn't sleep. He didn't eat. No diversions were brought to him. At the first light of the dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. And when he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God!" The king said, "Has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And then Daniel spoke with the king in an 85-year-old man voice. "May the king live forever. My God sent an angel and shut the lions' mouths. They haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him, and also before you, your majesty. I've not done any harm." And the king was overjoyed, and he gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found unharmed, for he trusted in his God. And the king gave a command that those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den, they, their children, and their wives. I don't think that was Daniel's idea, okay? And before they had even reached the bottom, the den of lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Don't you love the Bible? It's very interesting. Then King Darius wrote to these every people, nation, language who live on the whole earth, may your prosperity abound. I issue a decree that in all my royal dominion, people must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God. He endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the tower of the lions. And so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. 70 years in Babylon. How about you guys? But don't you kind of feel like at 85, you're kind of hoping like maybe this kind of things won't happen anymore? You know? I mean, most of us have a plan in place to basically make sure that nothing too crazy happens to us after 65, 66, 67, somewhere in there, right? We got a beach house in mind or something. We're going to snowbird it, head down to Florida for the winter. The thing is that life doesn't always work that way, does it? Best laid plans are not always the way we expect. At this point, actually in the last chapter, we think that Daniel had essentially been retired from noble life by the evil king. And then all of a sudden he's called out of retirement to read some stuff on the wall, and now he's back to it. In all of Daniel, we think that there are only about 9 days of his life recorded in Daniel. 9 days out of 70 years. I did some basic math, not a mathematician, but that's 25,541 days that we don't know anything about. We know very little about Daniel's life. We do know that's probably when he did his washing. He had his bouts with different diseases. He nursed his wounds from working with the rugged Babylonians. He rested his feet because they had blisters on them. Life things. Mundane things. Right? Boring stuff. The kind of stuff they don't put on reality TV, because even it's too boring to put on that. We're going to talk about the lion's den, but I'm more interested in an 85-year-old man knocking on 90 who still has the strength to serve in the king's court and stand up to the powers. How do you stay in the game that long? How do you stay working for the good and the prospering of evil kingdoms, one after another? How do we develop something like courage? This is what we want to kind of dig into today. Sure, yeah, I mean, we can read Daniel like an adventure story, but we can also forget the 25,000 days that Daniel serves basically as a slave in a difficult spot where he's constantly having to live in this tension, living for the things he believes. So how is courage like that born? Because I think that's what we're at. See, I think if I was honest, if I was going to write any kind of book as short as Daniel that was only going to cover 9 days of each of your lives, over the course of your life, you could probably come up with some pretty interesting things to share, right? I mean, 9 days, that's it. Everybody's going to have those 9 days. Everybody's going to have some kind of moments in their life that are pretty defining, life-altering kind of moments. The question is not really what we're going to do or how we're going to react in those moments, because those decisions have already been made in the other 25,000 moments. Courage is not a reactive kind of thing. It is a habit that is developed in the secret place with God. It is a lifestyle that we choose day in and day out as a constant act of resistance to the Babylon that we live in, that's coming at us all the time. So, 3 Ds. You're going to love this. Like our pastors. I believe courage is developed in the desert, through dependence, leads to devotion. No Bible character that does anything that sounds amazing does it without facing some kind of serious season of suffering. They just don't. If you read the Bible, it's just over and over again. I want to just start with Abraham. He and his wife were barren after God had promised them that they were going to have a whole nation was going to come from them, and they couldn't have a kid. And there wasn't a whole lot of interaction with God in that time either. There was only like these little brief moments. Joseph got sold into slavery into Egypt by his brothers. And he worked his way up in this house. And he worked the household. They put him in charge. And then the wife of the household wanted to sleep with him, but he wouldn't. And then she accused him of sleeping with her in any way. So he got thrown in prison for years. Moses was in the high king's court in Egypt, a prince of Egypt, until he killed someone and then escaped to the wilderness desert for 40 years so that he could be a shepherd with all that education. David rises to fame really early by killing this giant, only to be hunted down like a wild animal by a king who wanted him dead, and to live in caves, constantly on the run. The desert is the place that God uses to build the character that's necessary to act with courage. Even Jesus went into the desert before he started his ministry. For 40 days, he fasted, was tempted by Satan, resisted the temptation. So, if you are in a desert place, man, I just want to encourage you. God is just not done. Here's the thing, though. You need encouragement, and you need other people in your life who have been through it, because I'm just telling you, when you're in the desert, it feels like God is done. Or he's not real, or this whole thing is just a bunch of gooey junk that, it's like, I mean, some of you guys have been there. Help me here. Like, this is just how it is. When you're in the middle of that, when you got the cancer and you're feeling like any day now could be the end, or when your spouse has got it, or when you've been applying and applying and applying. That job's never coming. Or in my case, when you go to plant a church in a foreign country and uproot your family and then the church splits, like a few months in. Those places are where we develop, where God uses to kind of rub off our rough edges. Can I just talk to young people for a second? 30 and under? You guys out there? Yeah. There's just some stuff coming in your life. All right? This is just life. All right? Everybody's got to go through it. And I'm not trying to be a downer. I just want to be realistic. But what I want you to know is that God is going to use those things in your life to prepare you for the kind of work that he wants you to do. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have a calling for you right now, or he's not using you, or the Spirit's not using you. He is. God is so gracious, and he's using all of us in all different seasons of our lives, but he does take us through things to prepare us. And we whine, and we complain, and we quit our church because we're sure it's that church's fault. We do all kinds of stuff, right, in these seasons of life to try to cope. But I want you to know that God is not finished with you. And when you go through that, you are going to absolutely need the church to come around you and to support you and love you through it, because it is difficult and it is dark and it is stinky. You will just want to quit everything. You will feel like a failure. You will feel not good enough. You will not even know if you are saved or even what that means. This is the desert place. Other people have called it the dark night of the soul. In my experience, it's more than one night. And I'm still young. I have more desert places coming. God is not done working on my character. He loves me way too much to let me stay the way I am. And he uses these hard pressure situations in our lives to make us into the people that he needs us to be. It's uncomfortable, right? Everybody wants to be a diamond, but nobody wants to be pressed down on rock for thousands of years. That's just uncomfortable. But in the desert place is where you learn dependence. It's in those really hard seasons of life that you realize that God is the only thing that you can really hang on to. He is the only unchanging thing in the sea of tons of things that change. And so that's where we develop the dependence that we need on him. He is doing something in those seasons. And so I just want to encourage you, in that season, and you feel like giving up, you feel like your prayers are just like bouncing off the ceiling. Anybody else? Nobody? Ever been there? It's like, I'm praying, but I don't know. I guess we're supposed to do this, right? Those are the kinds of moments that are most holy, because in those mundane, in the 25,000 other days, that's where you begin to develop the mettle, to just continue to trust, even when it feels like stuff is like just not happening, right? It's dependence. That is what God is after. God, he does care about what you do, but he's actually way more concerned about the person you become. And so he's going to use all kinds of things in your life to teach you how to depend on him. And that is very uncomfortable. But then it leads to a devotion with him that makes it so that you can flourish in the work that he's called you to do. I have to tell you guys this because I don't know the kind of saints that I pastor. I don't know what you guys are gonna do. It's fun. It's like a fun thing as a pastor to see how is God gonna use all of you guys at different points in your life. I don't know. But I need to be faithful to teach you that a part of what it means for us to live in exile is that there's going to be a lot of boring days. And then the days that aren't boring are the kind of days where we're thrown into the lion's den. So that's not very fun, right? But that's when our courage comes out. We develop the devotion in the desert through our dependence on God. This is what Daniel did. It's also what David did. But we're not talking about Daniel. We're talking about Daniel. This is what Daniel did. Daniel, as soon as he heard about the edict, he just went up and did what he's been doing. Because he knows that God's law and God's ways are way higher than all this. I mean, he's been through this with other kings. You know? I mean, Nebuchadnezzar was like the top king ever, and God just humbled that guy out of nowhere. So it's like, okay, here's the next guy. So Daniel just goes up, he prays, he's got his windows open. Maybe it was hot, I don't know. Maybe he was just trying to show, like, I'm just praying up here. It's because Daniel's hope wasn't in like a new position or some kind of new military coup or like, oh, now I can really work my way up, you know, at 85. I'm sure that's what he was thinking. Now, Daniel's hope was rooted in something else. It worked its way out in his devotion to God as he learned how to depend on God for everything. And the courage that he has comes from the hope that is rooted in the fact that he knows that God is still. Some of you guys, we've been working from home, some of us, right? You have those moments, right, where you're like, hey, guys, keep it down, please. Kind of work here. You got kids. Nobody else has to face this. Pandemic this week. Yeah. Yeah, you're trying to be on a Zoom call and you tell your kids, like, it's going to be 1 hour. Don't bother me for anything. It's like 10 minutes into the Zoom call. All the questions, they've been keeping those questions all day like a hose that's like bent. And as soon as the Zoom call starts, it's like, oh, now it's time to ask all the questions. I don't know what it is about kids. It's like as soon as you're on the phone, they have like a million things to ask. It's amazing. But, sometimes we will yell things like, hey, Dad, would you be quiet? Daddy's trying to work, right? But I wonder if we could take that same thing and say it like a little more gently. So this is what I want to say to you, anybody that's going through a desert period or just whatever period of your life you're going through. Be quiet. Because your Father's behind the scenes. It's not done. He hasn't just given up on you. He hasn't given up on the things that are going on in your life. He is at work. And it's slow. It's not like the speed that we want it. But he is doing stuff. There should be great comfort. And so with this, I actually want to invite the team back up. I didn't tell them this because I just was praying back there before. So sorry, team, at the time. I just wonder if we could do that, the section from House. And you feel free if you want to do that last song that you played too. But yeah, in that the words are that we believe that God is still working, he's still speaking, he's still moving and working everything out for our good. I just want to encourage you to kind of begin to hopefully celebrate. If I can say it that way, not like hopefully you will celebrate, but celebrate hopefully. Okay? Celebrate with this hope that you know that God is not finished. Your life is not finished with the global geopolitical problems that are facing us right now, inflation, all this kind of stuff. God is not done. He is absolutely working behind the scenes. He has a much bigger plan and purpose than we can really ask, imagine, or even think of. And so, sometimes people complain to me that songs are too repetitive. And I say, yeah, I know. but also sometimes you need to meditate on things. You know? Sometimes we need to sing something over and over again because we just need to kind of like let it get into us and then think about some of the situations in our lives and then kind of make those prayers to God. Is God still moving? Is he still working? Is he still speaking? Is he really working all things out for the good of those who love him? And for those of you that have just not yet trusted in Jesus and you're like, this is all like way too cosmic for me. I don't know what's going on here. I'm just trying to get through life. I just want to say, like, this is a really good starting spot. You know, you just bring whatever you got, all the brokenness, all the stuff in your life, all the insecurities, you bring that right to Jesus. And he's been working behind the scenes in your life even before you realize it. There was a lot of stuff going on to get you to come and sit here today. It wasn't some accident that happened. But God is moving in your life. And if you can just whisper a prayer even to him under your breath, I don't know about all this, but if you are somebody that is really in control of everything, and I want to know, man, he's so faithful to just rush right in and answer those kinds of things. Because he is very close to the brokenhearted, and God, he opposes people who are proud, but he is right there if anybody is willing to say, I need you. I'm not complete. With that, let's just pray together. And would you stand? And then we're going to kind of respond together. And if you feel comfortable, I know it's maybe a little weird for some of you, but if you feel comfortable, you just kind of open your hands like this as a sign of surrender. And we're just going to invite the Holy Spirit to just speak to each of our hearts. The things I say that, from the Bible, and they matter, but sometimes God just has like a specific thing he's going to reveal to you today. So if you just say it with me, come Holy Spirit. It's not that God's not here, it's not that he's not present, but we're just inviting him to speak to our hearts. We need you, God. God, I pray that our church would be a church of humility, of people that are desperate for you, desperate for your presence and your work. But God, we'd also be a people that are just committed to obeying you through the desert and building a life of dependence and devotion to you, even when it doesn't feel good. Father, thank you so much just for each person that's here today. God, if there's anybody that's just far from you, broken and hurting, I just pray, God, that they would sense your nearness and that their hearts would be awakened to who you are. Father, for those of us that have been following you for a little while, I pray, God, that as we sing together, that you would just bring things to our mind that we can give up to you, that we can trust that you're working. Father, I pray that instead of being worrywarts and being anxious about everything, God, that we would bring all that to you, Jesus, and that we would pray through our worries, trust that you're working out everything for you. We love you, Lord.